So let's start with some concepts. Test strategy. There's usually some confusion about what is test strategy and what is a test plan. We're going to focus a bit on the test strategy with the things that are described on the left-hand side. It's usually for the whole organization. It guidelines about the way testing will be carried out and describe a systematic test process. And the green things are the things that we're going to touch on today. Test environments, test levels, tools, some non-functional testing, and test automation. How to get that into test strategy and to implement it in an easier way than just the whole document. So the whole idea is that usually you have loads and loads and loads of documentation, and no one really bothers to read them, and it's dubious work to do that. So instead, we're going to use some visualizations and models and things that are making life easier, both to create this strategy and also to implement it. We're going to look at different models, and that means that hopefully you will get some tools to your toolbox, and that way you can pick and choose whatever you want from this presentation and make it your own and derive from that one. That's the whole idea. So it's not one way to do it. We're going to look at different ways to do this. But going back, so you know who I am. My name is Jan. I'm from Sweden. I have worked in IT over 30 years and 20 years plus in testing. I currently work at Kestit as a consultant, specializing in test lead, creating test strategies, implementing them, and trying to help organizations move to more agile or into agile or make a journey in that way. But we're not going to dwell on me. We're going to move on. So this is the agenda, the introduction we have done. We're going to look on some reason why we want to do this, some ways of working, and we're going to start with the base model. That part is the chunkiest part of this presentation, because we're going to look at different base models. We're going to look at how to define achievable objects and how to plot out initiatives to actually achieve these objects and use the base models. We're going to do a wrap up, and we also have a bonus section looking at other models not necessarily connected to the strategy. And then we have a Q&A session. In all, it's about 40 minutes. So why do we want to visualize the test strategy? Looking at the Agile Manifesto, we have this line saying working software over comprehensive documentation. A lot of people think that, okay, then we don't have to document anything at all. That's not really the case. There is value in documentation, but we shouldn't over document things, and we should make it as easy as possible. So that could be a reason to actually do this. But I'm going to take it on a more personal note to give you a reason why I started with this in the first place. I used to work as a QA manager. I had 12 development teams in 3 geographical locations, Stockholm, Tallinn, and Budapest. In these teams, we had 1 QA. So there were basically all the team members you usually find in teams, but no dedicated QAs. This was an issue because we wanted to have high quality and we wanted to make tests run and people actually test things in a good way, which meant that I sat down and I created a test strategy and tried to make people implement this and understand it. But it really didn't work. It was loads of documentation and tedious work to actually try to get this running. And then by chance, I was at the conference, Cubis 2016, where they presented this idea with visualizing and kind of breaking down these things into models. So we brought that back. We implemented our own version of this in this organization, and lo and behold, it actually worked because it was a lot easier to actually grasp what we were doing. Everyone was involved, and that was a kind of a hit and a success story. So this is the reason why I started, and this is also the reason why you want to do this sometimes. So if you look at traditional way of working when you work with test strategies, we have, take out the text there. We usually have someone a test lead, test manager, someone that either on its own devices or get appointed to take out a test strategy. We have some kind of board of directors or something that says yay or nay to this one. And then it's a Word document that is loaded onto a server. And finally, this poor thing kind of withers and dies because no one reads it, no one knows where it is. The way we did it, and I think it's a lot better, is actually to have someone drive this. But you also do an inventory of where we are, where we want to go with the people that's involved, the people that are going to be affected by this strategy. You anchor this, of course, in the organization, and you bring out a model that everyone can understand and work with. And then you have some kind of consensus over the whole thing. And instead of loading this into a Word document that is 200 pages long, you try to make it as easy to access as possible, break it down into several different pages on an intranet, a wiki or something like that. So it's kind of on tip of your hands when you need it. And the part that you need is easy to find. That way you actually have a document with a pulse that lives and works. So we're going to look at bases for test strategy, and this base is something that we're going to start with and work from. So this is a base for discussions. As I said, we want to make this a thing that everyone is involved with. So we need to have discussions. We also use these base models for presenting ideas and give a quick overview of what we're doing. And a simplified model normally helps when presenting to people that are not really involved in testing or doesn't really understand what we're doing. And as they say, an image is more descriptive than 1,000 words. So that's also one of the reasons we use these models. So jumping into one of these models, we're going to look at several, so don't get overwhelmed. You can pick and choose whatever works for your organization or your strategy. This is a classical DevOps loop. The different stages where planning, coding, building, testing, etc. take place, and it kind of reruns all the time. DevOps was created by developer and ops, so tests got their own little box in the corner. And we all know that testing cannot be done after the fact. We cannot test in quality into the software. So there's a lot of different things that we can do. This means that we can plot out different initiatives on this base model. If the organization is using a DevOps model, we can plot out these different initiatives, saying that, okay, in the planning phase, we should do static code analysis and some kind of requirement model, etc., etc. This is a lot easier to overview than a load of documentation. You can also start looking at what environment you want to use with these different activities, meaning that the local environment, i.e. the developer's PC, is where you code, you do the unit test code reviews, you have some linting tools, whatever, and then you move on in the model. So these are kind of a base for discussions. You can see different activities and can use your model that you're using already in your organization, and everyone will understand it a lot easier and better than loads of documents. Another model that is gaining more traction are the agile testing quadrants. These are well defined in books by Janet Gregory and Lisa Crispin. So if you haven't read any of these books, they have 3 different ones called Agile Testing, More Agile Testing, and I think the last one was called Agile Testing Condensed. They describe this model very, very well there. But in short, the left-hand side describe preventive things, checks for the expected, verifying that things work as you expect. And in the first quadrant, you are testing the component that the IT system consists of, i.e. on the developer's machine, basically, unit tests, component integration tests, etc. Those are normally automated. In the next quadrant, you're testing the system as a whole, functional testing, story testing, simulations, etc. This is usually a mix of automated and manual tests. And then you have the right-hand side where you kind of do the traditional testing, detecting defects, looking for the unexpected, things that kind of make things not tick as you expect. And there you use different methods to achieve your goals. And this part is normally the manual heavy part in your testing, because you're usually up on the UI side, and that is harder to automate in most cases. And for the last quadrant, you have technical perspective that most can only be tested when the system is ready, meaning agility testing, scalability, performance, load testing, security testing, all of these things that either you have a hidden system or a near production system or even the production system to run things. So if you plot out your different initiatives among these different quadrants, you can actually define the different test types you want to use. You can define the environments you want to use, and you can define the processes and tools you want to use per quadrant. So when you're discussing the different things you want to do, if you're using this model, it's a lot easier to actually visualize this instead of trying to just make notes on a paper in words. So for everyone who's worked with testing for a while or are working in a waterfall organization, this should be somewhat familiar. This is a very, very old model, but it's still relevant depending on what system you work with and what models you're using. So on the left-hand side, we have all the different requirements or activities that is going up until the coding part. And on the right-hand side, you have the equivalent testing that belongs to these initiatives. But you can also use this model as a base for discussion, saying, okay, BDD is behavior-driven development, meaning discussions with stakeholders and possibly bringing out some scripts for doing Gherkin scripts or Cucumber scripts for future testing. You can do static code analysis, etc. And the thing is that using this model, you can have these discussions that we want to have on what to do, in what environment, and when. The dotted line with a little exclamation thingy is a guard place where we actually don't want to have the code move beyond this point without knowing the quality of the code. You should do certain activities before passing there. That will be shown again in later things. So these are different models that you can use depending on your organization, depending on where you are, what methods you use. And it makes life a lot easier to discuss what you want to do. My favorite, however, is starting with a pipeline. This is kind of a standard pipeline. Most organizations have something similar. We have the local environment where the developer sits and do these things. We have the test environments, some kind of staging environment, and the production environment for the customers. Hopefully some kind of firewall, and then the customers if you have a web application. So this was one model that we started with in one assignment I had to see, okay, this is what we have today. What do we want to do? Where do we want to go? One thing that came out of the discussions was actually to change the pipeline. We wanted to have something called the dark launch, which meant that we deploy everything to a hidden production environment that the customer cannot see, but it's actually affected by activities that the customer does or the end user. So when we have verified that this is working as expected, we switch between what is here called the red and blue environment, and then we start over again. So that was one thing that came out from this discussion that we probably never have reached otherwise. We then plotted out different tests that we wanted to do in the different environments. As earlier, code reviews, linting, and unit tests in the local environment, smoke test, regression tests, system integration tests, functional testing in the test environment. And then in the staging environment where the code should be near production, so to say, we did some more system integration tests, user acceptance test, the UAT, and additional exploratory testing. Meaning that most of the things in tests was actually done by automation. that we plotted out as well. The little robot is the automated part, so to say. So most of the things that we did in a test environment was automated, meaning that we could free resources to do some proper in-depth testing by usual functional testing and exploratory testing in these different environments. Load performance was also automated, it usually is. And we put in heavy monitoring on different places. That is also one thing that came out. So this image kind of gives a whole view of the system we work with, the different tests we want to do in the different areas, what we want to automate, and what we still see is a tester or human activity. And I guess that this image kind of replaces 20, 30 pages of written information that is really hard to grasp. So this is a lot easier to understand and start the discussions on and start to work on. This also meant that kind of by default, we got this model where we could plot out our rollbacks and feedback loops, meaning that if we had different parts of the code that wasn't supposed to pass beyond these points, we also had a feedback and rollback, which meant that, okay, coding, unit test, and code review must pass, and then they will trigger the smoke test when they are committed to the main branch. If that doesn't pass, we should roll back automatically. The last known working code should be placed on the test environment. So anything that is triggered is actually automated testing that triggers these activities of a rollback or not. Either it moves forward or it moves backwards. If it's a manual activity like exploratory testing, we need an approval to move to the next point, and then we have a feedback instead. This meant that anything that didn't pass smoke test or passed smoke test and didn't pass regression test was actually rolled back automatically. So we know that we also always had working code in the test environment. And this was kind of a bonus from the previous discussions. So we got this really nice kickoff from that. So for anyone who is a fan of Excel or grids or matrices, there is also the possibility, of course, to do these visualizations without using the funny little guys and computers and whatnot. So you can actually make this grid where you have the action or activity and what different environment you want to do this in. Okay, unit testing, you want to do that in local. Code reviews, you want to do that in local, and that is a human activity, hence the H, and the automated activities are an A. So you can easily build your own matrix like this, which means that if you want to have a look at this, if you want a quick reference, you can easily find it in these matrices instead of reading through large chapters of documents. So those are the different base models for the discussions you want to have. It's important to remember that these are the basis, as I said, for discussing things, for moving forward. And to get to this point, where you try to define achievable objectives. And achievable is really important because normally when you talk to managers, foremost, the objective is automate everything. That might be an objective, but it's not really clear. I would argue that you could not really automate everything to start with. And it's very, very hard to see, okay, so what does this mean? How do we get there? So I would not recommend that as the objective. Something that is general objective could be to decrease the defects in production by a number, cut time for ready for test to ready to production, so you get quicker to market, fully automated CI/CD pipeline up to the staging environment. You can build your own objectives on a more general level. For some, you need to know what numbers you have today. I mean, you need to know how many defects you will normally get in productions to be able to reduce them. But that is kind of goes with the territory. But these are things that you can measure and you can actually go back on and say, okay, did we achieve our objectives or not? You can also detail the objectives in a more specific manner to say that test environment should not be a bottleneck, meaning that probably you have issues with the test environment. That is super normal in all organizations I've seen. There is not consistent software on the test environment. There are not enough test environment for the different test or teams and users, etc. So that should not be a bottleneck, and that you can monitor as well. You want to purpose build test data when it's needed. That is something that you can actually achieve. And you want to have automated smoke test or automated regression test. So more granular objectives to move on to. But they should also be achievable. They should not be kind of totally out there in the blue. So once you have this, you have your model that you want to work with or you have worked with, you have your objectives. Then the next part starts, which is kind of the actual work to start implementing this. You get the group together again, the people that work with this during the whole session, developers, testers, managers, whatever you have that is involved, and you see what you need to do to achieve these different goals and fulfill the models. So those are different activities. And you will also need to sort out any prerequisites and dependencies you have to achieve this. That is super important, so you know what to do and when. And then you can plot them out in yet another model, which is kind of the thing that is what this all leads to actually be able to implement this. The first time we did this, we used a book called How Google Tests Software. One small section of this book, just have a quick look at something called Google Test Certified. They have a 5-step model. I don't know if they use it still today, they did then, where you kind of fulfill the different things in step 1, and then you move into step 2, and etc. So we took that as a starting place and made them our own, which is super important. You cannot just blueprint someone else's model or initiatives. You need to make them your own. It needs to be applicable to your organization and your work. But this one really helped us the first time we did it. So we plotted out the activities. We built a board with 5 levels, basic to pro, so to say. And then we also did different areas. We looked at the deployment pipeline, test coverage, features, processes and analysis, performance, and non-functional. So those were the areas, and we wanted to have 5 different levels to work with. And this was a typical post-it exercise. We had a whiteboard with post-it notes, and we moved them back and forth, removed different post-it notes, etc. And as we went along, we came up with different one-liners that we wanted to do. And we also plotted out the different dependencies between these. So, I mean, we cannot have deploy with red tests without having the ability to run the tests. We need to identify non-deterministic tests, that is, tests that are actually failing depending on the test environment or test data, not depending on the actual code. So these are things we wanted to do. I think we started out with some 70 plus initiatives. And after discussions, we had like 30 or 35 left. And some of these are typically included in test strategies, like this one, no deploy with red tests, smoke test run and pass before release. These are things that you normally find within a test strategy document. And we got them in this model, but we also know how we would actually achieve this. We would need to do some work before we could actually achieve these objectives. That was really important. At the end of this presentation, and I guess you will receive the presentation afterwards, there is a list of the initiatives that we had. There is also a list of the initiatives we had from the Google book. So you can have a look at them and kind of get inspired to build your own initiatives. After doing this, I think 2 or 3 years later, I found this one, the continuous deployment maturity model, CDMM, which is fairly the same thing, but not quite. We have 5 different levels, the same thing there. But this one looks at the organization as a whole. We looked at a development team or a part of development teams, so we could actually bring up the quality and initiatives within our teams. This model is looking at the whole organization. So you look at culture, organization, design and architecture, build and deploy, test and verification. Those 2 were the things that we looked specifically, information and reporting, etc. So this one is taking a organization-wide look, more or less, at the same thing. But it's built in the same manner. We had one-liners with initiatives, and then you see what you need to do to get to an expert level of the work you're actually doing. So now we have 2 models that are similar, but not really the same. Is one better than the other? Not really. It depends on your objectives with doing this, why you want to do this. The model that we, for some reason, call Tequila, it doesn't actually mean anything. It was a good name. We found it easily in our intranet, and nothing else would actually call Tequila for some strange reason. There we planned on a detailed level. It was very straight on what we wanted to do. We also had a clear picture of dependencies, which was really, really important for our work. But it was also isolated to the individual team or department, which meant that maybe we're not really in sync with the organization. The CDMM model is looking at the organization, which means that the whole organization should be in sync in this work. But the dependencies and the details are not as clear. But of course, you can do a mix of these. You can use both models individually, or you can do a mix of them or whatever, but don't make the models too complicated. If you try to kind of merge these 2 into one, I think it will be too large, and then you kind of lost the whole idea of visualizing and simplifying the models and your strategies. But of course, you can have the CDMM on an organizational level and break it down into a Tequila-like model for the teams and departments if you want to. That would be a way forward. Cool. So we have loads of one-liners. And we all know that one-liners is not necessarily a good thing, because we need to have a common view of what we want to do and what we mean with these different things. Meaning that anytime the word unit testing comes up in our models or in our work, it actually has a definition. We define this with a short definition, the definition of done for implementing this, a list of subject matter expert, a person that you could actually ask if you have questions, if there were any tool support, and any prerequisites to reach this stage or area. That means that all the different things. I mean, unit testing is something very general and very common, but if you Google unit testing, you will get slightly different explanation what it is. So we made our own definition based on what we wanted to do and how we work with it. And we did that for all these different initiatives or one-liners, meaning that everyone had the same idea of what they needed to do and what it actually meant. That was crucial. Otherwise, people are starting to assume things and make, well, more or less creative definitions themselves, which is not really the way you want to go. You want to have a common view of everything you do. So there we are. We have all the foundations in place. We have the model that we choose. We have the objectives that we wanted to have. We have the different initiatives. Everything is basically in place. And this is where everything should be ready to go and super clear. And now we reach the implementation stage. This is where things usually goes wrong. You have all the fancy ideas, you have everything there, and then you should just implement it, which is usually the hardest part, quite honestly. So implementation. We had different teams that have their own models. There are different things that they should do. And we actually set up something that we called a QA forum. If you're working with a Spotify model, I don't know if anyone is doing that anymore, you would probably call it a guild. But we have workshops, so representatives from each team, one by one with different initiatives, we discuss them, how we want to achieve it, what are the common goals, and how we want to implement it in your team. And after sorting that out, everyone went back to their team as the advocate for this, and the team started working with it. And then we met again, had another workshop for the next initiative, etc., and so on, which means that everyone was involved during this implementation. This has worked really well, except for one time at one organization where this advocate or representative really didn't get the traction in the team. So at that point, I actually set up workshops with each teams individually, because we realized that we were talking different language. The teams didn't really know what everything meant. They weren't test savvy. So we started with testing 101, workshops on what to test, how to test, why we want to test, etc., how to build good requirements, all the basic stuff. And then we gained traction slowly and could actually move forward. But otherwise, we have actually had success with this QA forums, and then with the teams having a representative in this QA forum. Worked really well. So in the end, we also have an organization that is paying for this in money and time. So having these models really make it easy to report back and see how far are we? Are all the teams in a similar place? Is someone kind of falling behind? And if that case, it's easy to kind of pinpoint what's going on and help them. And we can report on this and setting goals for when we want to implement the different levels. You can even have certifications on this. This team is actually now 100% basic or 100% beginner or 100% intermediate or pro, which kind of is fun and rewarding for the team. If you have the organizational possibility and the politics is not in the way, you can actually make this a gamification with some awards and stuff, depending on where the teams are. That really works really well normally. So wrap up of this test strategy part, use models that fits your need. I've given you a few different ones. You might have other models, but maybe you get an idea how you can work with them with your data. I've shown this like a step-by-step thing. It's not sequential. Usually you move back and forth and revisit the different areas. And don't kind of fix the different things from start. You must adjust and update information. Maybe you want to change your environment, or maybe you want to change your pipelines. Maybe you want to edit your definitions, etc. So that is really important as well. This is an ongoing work. And once you reach your goal, you kind of start again on a higher level or new teams, or whatever. So the work never really ends either. And the most important thing, it's not a one-man show. If you have one person doing all this work and then try to implement it by coming out to the team saying, okay, this is what you're going to do, it's normally a fail. So that could be an issue. So some short parts for a bonus section. The testing pyramids. These are loved and hated in different areas, but could be a good basis for discussion. Because I mean, if you want to do some automation implementation, it might be a good thing to actually discuss what you want to do and why and where. And the testing pyramids, love them or hate them, could be a good starting point. So if your base for doing test automation is trying to reach some kind of code coverage, I would argue start with the thing that is closest to code, as the pyramid suggests. And it's also kind of known that execution time doing this also differs very much. If you do unit testing and etc., or testing close to the code, you usually talk about seconds to run the test suites. Further up in the API, we talk about minutes. If you do UI testing, it talks about hours. So this kind of implies that you should always do testing from bottom up. If not, the objective for your automation is business processes, then you should definitely start from the top, because the business process is hard to test from the bottom up version. It also depends on what your objectives are. Why do you want to do this? But you can have the discussions starting with these pyramids. And it's also really important to remember that these are overlapping tests. If you do things on the top in the UI, you will probably touch things that you could have tested by unit test or API tests, and which are faster. So this is also one thing to consider. And this one that we have looked at earlier, automate all the things. It's easy to think that, okay, we just start with automation. We go out on the market, we buy some cool tool, and we come back and we'll automate. We just start doing it, the Nike swoosh style. This is something that I've shamelessly stolen from Jürgen Damberg. All credits to him. These are some steps that you can kind of go through if you want to see that if you're ready or not to actually start automating. What is your objective for automating? Is it to cut costs and kind of fire testers? That's a bad start, definitely. If it's reduce debt or have better quality, faster time to market, okay, move on. Do you have the staff that is needed to do test automation? If not, are you ready to hire, etc.? So this is a step-by-step chart that you can look at and kind of say, yay or nay. The green ones are, of course, a yes. The red arrows are a no. And if you get to the bottom where you actually have yes on everything, you have the test cases, you have the maintenance organization, the test data strategy, you can mock dependencies, you have the environment ready, etc. Then you can start looking at test automation in a wider scale. You can, of course, do unit testing, that goes without saying, but test automation on a higher level, on a more organizational level. There's a lot of things that can go wrong, and I've seen loads and loads of test automation projects that kind of went down the drain because they didn't do their homework. They were not ready. But this is a super easy way to visualize what you have and what you haven't and where you want to end up. So if you had these discussions with managers or with the staff or whatever, this is one thing that you can relate to. And also, as the last one, we talked about the test plan. Visualize your test plan. I frequently use, when I do hands-on testing, instead of writing loads of documentation, what I want to test, what my expectations are, etc., I use mostly exploratory testing things, and I use a mind map, which means that in this case, this is actually Microsoft Notepad. We have Notepad, we have the different levels of the menu, file edit view, etc. And as you test, you kind of add to this little mind map. This is a hypothetical thing, but say that you find an issue, which I found on the dialogue. I add that to our Jira, and anyone that sees this can actually follow my steps up until that point. They can open the Jira ticket from the mind map, and they can work with it. This has worked really, really well with handing over issues to developers and reporting stuff. It's a fast way to do it. It saves loads and loads of documentation, and I can revisit this, reuse it, or just throw it away when I have used it. So it's a fast way to do it and a fast way to report, and people know what has been tested and what has not been tested. So this is a tip. Start using mind maps when you do your actual testing. So, and as the last final word on the way, something that should never be forgotten. And for those who don't speak Latin, the easier way in English, it's a bad plan if it admits no changes. So it doesn't matter how cool or good plan you have, you need to be able to change your plan if the circumstances around your plan actually changes. which is usually a good thing. So you cannot start out with a plan and have the same plan 3 years later when you reach your goal. That doesn't really work. And as I said, these are samples. These are initiatives that we used. You don't have to read them everything now. We are recording the presentation, and you will probably get a PDF of the presentation afterwards. And these are the things coming up that actually was in the Google Test Certified plan. So these are things that you can look at and see, okay, is this something we can use, or is something that we could tweak, or could it give us an idea to what we could do to actually achieve these things? And that's it for now. So now I think we have time for some questions. And I see if I can stop sharing so we get the presentation out of the way. So how does this integrate into highly regulated environments requiring documentation, etc., like finance, medical, or aviation? Yes, that's a good one. I know that he did a blog about it, and also have discussion with like a guy called James Bach, who started working with medical applications and had a really thorough look at what was actually needed, what you need to do. I mean, the things that you must do depending on legal requirements, etc. Yes, sorry, you need to do that. But this also is a base for doing these documentation. Maybe if you start just documenting from page 1 and doing it, it's a tedious work. You might over document stuff. If you start with one of these models and have discussions around them, it's a lot easier to actually pinpoint what you need to document. So this is a base for discussion and moving on doing this. So it doesn't replace other documentation. It could, in some kind, it could be added as an explanation, and it's definitely a base for further discussion. But unfortunately, yes, of course, if you have documentation that you must do, then yes, you have to do it. We cannot replace anything that is kind of written in EIA demands or something like that. Then we have another question also from Oren. Did you have a model of models? Bigger companies have multiple areas with different approaches to test strategy, but need to integrate at different points. Yes, I would say that doing this, the CDMM model look at the organizational level, but also depending on where you are. The current assignment I have, we have one team working very waterfall. We have one team that is working traditional agile with Scrum. And then we have one team that is kind of very innovative and working with DevOps, etc. So for their need, we have started with different models to start the discussions and bring out the initiatives. The initiatives then are very similar, funny enough. They all fall down to test environment, they fall down to test data, things that need to be done in that area, and also the build pipelines. So even though they have different approaches, we kind of get the same challenges and the same initiatives. But as I said, the team or the different teams that works in a similar way have one model as the tequila model I presented, and on a organizational level, we then have not only build and deploy, test, etc., but we also have the different teams have their own role in a CDMM-like model, so to say. So we can keep track on it. But the interesting thing is the initiatives themselves are very similar, regardless how the team is actually working. I hope that is to some extent answer that question. Yes, model of models is shown in SAFe. It's hard to visualize, but the same model as is shown here is the same, but you leave out all that is DevOps. That doesn't work with different suppliers or parts of the device. No, and I try to emphasize this, that these are different models that I have used. These are different models that you can use depending on how you work, but you need to take a model that fits your need, and you need to fill it with your data. That is super, that's imperative. You cannot just take one of my model or some other model from someone else and just blueprint it right into your organization. That is the base error that everyone did with the Spotify agile model that was super hot some years ago. Everyone wanted to just implement it, and not even Spotify implemented it. They kind of worked that out from the base and have reworked it over and over again, and is now working with the different things in totally in different areas. So yes, you need to go from your needs with your possibilities and make the data and the model your own. And I'm not super knowledgeable in SAFe. I have done the initial introduction course in SAFe. I haven't looked at the DevOps models for SAFe, etc., but I have a hunch about it. But yes, I cannot emphasize this enough. Use your own model, use your own data. That's kind of the go-to thing here. Definitely. This is just to spawn ideas how you could work with it. So, doesn't work when you have a service that is built on a number of different suppliers. Not super sure, but one service should be from one place, but it depends on how you look at it. And these are also different areas if you're developing your own code, if you own the code, or if you're kind of doing the UAT for third-party software that you're receiving into the organization. So this works best when you actually develop your code. You're on your own. I mean, you own the code, you own the development of the code. These are the things that are most suitable for this. If you have different suppliers that supply software to you, third-party suppliers, you usually do end-to-end testing, user acceptance testing, higher level testing. You can still visualize this more than just document it, but working with this really, really effective works best if you have your own code and work with it. So yeah, I to some extent agree, but you can still simplify most things depending on where you are. So can Kestit, not a better name than AdCube, enable chat and we can continue the discussion? Yes, we used to be AdCube, but we are now Kestit since we are part of a bigger organization. That's the reason for that one. We could maybe enable chat, but we only have 10 minutes left. So let's see what we have after this Q&A.
Jan?
Yo.
Yes, this is Mary speaking. I think we can send out like a question if there are an interest in continuous these discussions in an external chat or something. But let's see if there are several people that wants to do that. So I'll get back to you on that one, Tobias.
Yes. And to be frank, I only have these 10 minutes left on my time, but I would love to have future discussion on this, and I'm super available at most times. So just ping me in any way or means you want. What is your SAFe and how the SAFe? Oh, there we have the jump in the questions. What is your view on how the SAFe level of agile product delivery can be visualized? As I said, I'm not super into the SAFe model, so I don't have any views here and now. I need to get more acquainted with that one, quite honestly. But the little I know we could actually have some visualization on that one as well, but I don't have any pinpointed detailed answers here and now. We have a question from Amelie. Have you worked with teams where the testers are business staff who helps with test and you are the only one from the QA perspective? What models have you used with them and why? Yes, I have. And this was one of the reasons that we worked out the thing that I called tequila, which meant that we had developers. We didn't have business staff in that case, but we could actually do something similar. I have worked a lot with business staff doing UAT, etc., not deep testing. There are different ways of doing that. But I think the one thing that is really important, not to direct them too much. Don't say press button X and then press button whatever. Give them more general instructions, like perform a purchase or whatever system you're working with. Try to register a customer, try to whatever, on a higher level, and see how they work with it. But also give them small sheets that they can kind of follow up with. We also did something that Nokia started years ago, which I think they called a test fest, which meant that we brought together people from all over the organization for a 2-hour session where they tested something, and we just told them, okay, this is your objective. You're this type of person, and you're supposed to verify that you can actually create an account, log in, do whatever was supposed to do. And then see if we find issues, usability issues, etc. So there are different ways of doing that, but I think that the main thing is not to be too detailed for the business staff. Because if you are in the instructions, then you can use anybody to test, so to say, and it's like a scripted test instead. But of course, I mean, giving the overview, you can use models so that everyone understand how the system is working and what you should do. These are really short answers. As I said, we can probably get together in some other formats in the future and discuss these things. From Tobias again, I've been working on a project level of a big Swedish vehicle company, Volvo Trucks. That means I try to use SAFE in order to synchronize deliveries from Volvo IT, Volvo GTT, and also a company for smartphone application. Yes, own code. Okay, oh, that was a comment from on my previous comment, I guess. Yes. I see. So in different parts of the organization deliver different parts of the code. Then you could get an overview. This is a very specific situation, so I think that would be, you have to kind of look into that specifically. You mentioned documenting common use definitions, such as unit testing. Do you think that should be a part of the test strategy document model? Yes, I think. But regardless how you do your test strategy document, if it's a Word document or if it's something else, don't have it in there. Have it somewhere where you can easily find it in a list of definitions, preferably in a wiki or on your intranet or wherever, so it's easily found and easily linked, at least. So every time you kind of bring up these different comments or definitions in other documentations, you can actually just link to your definition. So you have one single point of truth. So if it's not super part of the test strategy, it should be somewhere around there to give ideas and points, because you might have different ways of working with, like unit tests, how you want to define that. Should you always run them? Should you add unit test everything, or just if you do new code or refactor code, or if you fix tests, etc. So those definitions, it doesn't need to be very, very large definition, but it's good to have it there so everyone works in the same way, definitely. So in a way, I think it should be connected to test strategy, definitely. Oh yeah, good point from Oren. A lot of information about test certified at Google is in Mike Bland's blog. He and others involved in the process are already retired. Yes, it's an old book. I found it in 2014 or 15, but it was a good kickoff for us to start with, definitely. But that's a good link for that one. And bringing all people involved together. Yeah, that's kind of crucial to make this a success story, definitely. And test is not only what testers do. No, the whole team is involved and responsible to build quality from the beginning, and unit test is part of it to make sure that quality delivers. Yes, I have used unit test as a sample, but of course we talk about smoke test, unit test, integration tests, UAT, all the different testing things, but not at least requirements. Everything that goes into this that is affecting the quality of what you build and what you deliver is important to bring in here. So the way you work to define your requirements and to fulfill them and verify that they are fulfilled, that is also part of this, of course. And if you have a specific way of working with code quality and stuff like that, everything that is involved in bringing out a quality product is there. So it's not only what testers traditionally do, it's a whole holistic view on the thing. And a good final point from Tobias, always focus on the end product. Users as QA, regardless of where you are. my user was a driver. Yeah, I guess we all have different areas where the end user might get hurt or whatever, financially or physically, with the products that we made, or if it's just a fun little app. It all differs on the actual experience, but always focus on the end user, on the end product, definitely. Regardless of the requirement that usually was created before US engaged as a QA. Yeah, definitely. But if you can be involved in a requirement process, be involved in a requirement process. It gives you an idea on what to test and how to enhance it, and also give comments on requirements that are not specific enough for you. Good question, good comments. Cool. But you probably know where to find us. You can find me on LinkedIn. I think I have the link in the presentation that we will send out to you afterwards as well. So you can ping me there, or if you don't have any shuttles, and discuss other things if you want to.